Welcome to Conversations That Matter. Joining me now is Mike Minear. Mike, who do we have on the show today?
So today we have Minister John Rustad. He is the Provincial Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation, official part of his title. Minister Rustad comes from northern BC. I always find it interesting where these politicians come from. He was raised in the interior, grew up fishing, hunting, in the outdoors. So he has a real appreciation for the challenges and the opportunities that come with potential resource development in BC and First Nations relations. He talks about the fact that it's taken us a lot of work and a lot of time, 20 years, to get not a lot done in terms of treaties with First Nations, and that we have to manage our expectations, that it could be another 20 years and we may still only have a few new treaties, that we're talking about over 200 First Nations that the province has to develop agreements with. And if you think about LNG, that's 40 to 50 First Nations alone that have potential to weigh in on the LNG piece. So Minister Rustad has quite a big challenge carved out for himself.
Well, also he's going to be overseeing a process that is going to have legislative and potentially constitutional challenges and changes that have to be part of the equation as we move forward.
And you're absolutely right. The Supreme Court decision, the Tsilhqot'in, really introduces a whole new level of uncertainty and challenge that he's going to have to grapple with. He's been pretty clear that as it relates to resource projects, that he thinks the province with their 5 conditions has done a good job of being clear of what we're going to be seeing in terms of not only protecting the environment, but shared prosperity. In other words, prosperity for the companies that are developing these projects, but also the First Nations and the local communities. So that's his goal, shared prosperity. He states it over and over again. And it'd be interesting to hear from him how he plans to ensure that shared prosperity.
So in light of the conversation that I had with Chief Joe Alphonse and then also with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, they're saying that the province has to do more. But they're also saying, let's not overreact. The province is open for business. So let's now go to that conversation that I had with Mr. Rustad on September the 15th. Thank you for joining me. This is in the words of Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, interesting and potentially volatile times. Is he right?
I think, when you look at relations in British Columbia, they've come a very long way in the last 9 years. And I would say that relations today are better than they have been perhaps at any time in our past. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of work that still needs to be done. We're at a bit of a crossroads right now because of a recent court decision. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that they're volatile, but certainly there's a piqued interest and a piqued expectation, and we're going to be working to try to find a way through that.
Well, I interviewed Chief Joe Alphonse, and he said this isn't a game changer; it's a whole new game. And he's saying the province has to come to us with more if we're going to move forward. What does that more look like, and is that even possible?
The Tsilhqot'in decision, I think, is very historic, obviously. It's the first declaration of Aboriginal title in Canada. So it's very unique, and it was a case that took, based on an action that happened probably 30 plus years ago, 25 years winding through the courts. So there's no question in my mind that there's something new, there's something different. And so we have actually met with the Tsilhqot'in, and we worked through and had some just very general discussions, and we've actually now signed a letter of understanding with them. There's a whole host of very complex issues that we need to work through, and so our letter of understanding actually lays out how we will work together and how we will try to embrace this and bring life to this decision. And so, when Chief Alphonse says that, this is a whole different game, he's right. What we'll be doing with them is going down a whole new path on something that has never been done before. But in terms of relationship, it actually helps build and now gives us an opportunity to explore and do way more than we perhaps have ever been able to do.
You just used the word complex set of issues, or the phrase complex set of issues. And I think that might be an understatement, phrasing it that way. Like there's layer upon layer upon layer, and historical ways in which we have interacted with and against one another? How do we start to unravel that and create a dialogue of harmony and move forward? Like, probably we can't get even close to understanding that in this conversation, but is it possible?
I think it is. And for example, we just did another first just in early September where we had an all chiefs meeting where we brought in First Nation leadership from all around the province to meet with the Premier and all of our cabinet and all of our deputies. And so it's never been done before. And of course, the court decision, the Tsilhqot'in decision, was a big part of that discussion. And there was an expressed willingness, I think, by many chiefs, and certainly by our Premier and our government, to look at a different path, to look at what we can do. But I think if we try to take it all as one big bite, because of the complexities, I think it will struggle. But I think there's opportunities as to how we can build this and how we can work together.
Grand Chief Phillip said, following the Delgamuukw decision, there was, in his opinion, an overreaction from the non-Aboriginal communities that, oh my gosh, there's so much uncertainty, we have no idea where to go. And he's concerned that there may be an overreaction again. And I think that, like, you might be on the same side of the discussion with him. Are you concerned about that?
I think there needs to be an understanding by Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people alike in British Columbia. And I think it needs to be founded actually on our history. There's many, many people in the province that do not understand our joint history and the challenges and issues and things that we've gone through. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the work that they did kind of pointed that out in terms of people's lack of understanding of many of the things. So I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of working with both populations to be more comfortable, I think, with our history and also what we need to do to be able to find reconciliation.
Do you believe that this decision, as Justice McLaughlin pointed out, is a step towards reconciliation?
I think it's a very, very important decision. An Aboriginal title and rights is defined in the Canadian Constitution. Most people haven't read the Canadian Constitution.
Right.
Now, what this court decision has done is said, here's some rules around Aboriginal title, and here is a place where the Aboriginal title exists. And so that will now have created a new sort of point from which we can build on and which we can try to work in harmony, if we can, with First Nations on a wide variety of issues, both for the title area and areas that are not considered Aboriginal title.
Where do we go from here? Like, the Supreme Court has said to the Tsilhqot'in Nation, okay, you have title, but effectively they do, but it's not a done deal yet. What has to happen next? And then how do you go towards creating a regulatory and an investment climate within that region that makes business possible?
So in terms of defining the title, that is a done deal. There is title there, but there's some rules around the title which makes it somewhat challenging to consider some of the options that the Tsilhqot'in may want to do. And so what we need to now do is figure out how can we work with them within the law, within the jurisdictions, to be able to help them achieve that. And it may be that we need to be looking at going even beyond title in terms of how we do that. I don't know at this point, and that's why I say it's a very, very complex issue. Something as simple as range tenures that are on there. Something as simple as the Department of Fisheries and Oceans actually has an office and facilities on tidal land. What happens to that? Who's now the landlord of that? How does that work? So there's a wide range of things that need to be worked through. But the good news is that the Tsilhqot'in are very excited about wanting to do this and wanting to do this in partnership, which is what our letter of understanding is about, is how we can engage with them and actually work through these step by step and try to, as I mentioned, bring life to what this ruling really is.
So do you believe that the province is open for business, that when it comes to all these disputed territories and there's uncertainty about who has the right to title on this, that, or the next piece of land, there's so many of them, how does business move forward?
Over the last 9 years, we went from a place where we had virtually no agreements with First Nations, between the province and First Nations. And we decided at that point that we were going to make a change. that we were going to try a new relationship and try a different path. Because for that very reason, there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty on the land-based companies were having difficulty moving things through. And so from that point now, we've got well over 200 significant land-based agreements, as well as hundreds of other agreements with nations across the province, which has helped to bring certainty and helped to drive some investment. And so there is a period of time right now, because there's all kinds of interpretations for what this case is. But the bottom line is, I think most of the chiefs I've talked to, if not all of them, have all expressed an interest in wanting to engage and see economic activity. They want it to be balanced with environmental and cultural values. And of course, they want to have it balanced in terms of rights and title. And so this now has presented us an opportunity to take the work that we've done over the last 9 years, and actually look at how we can shape it now and move forward. And so I would say that it's not business as normal, but at the same time, because there's a willingness by First Nations in the province and industry to be able to want to do things, I think there is still plenty of opportunity to work on the land base.
But are we looking at a new level of government in all of these different nations that are going to have separate, different rules? And do we look at that as saying, okay, well, this is outside of the scope of what the province brings to the table as far as environment, labor, health, and a wide range of other regulations? Or do we say, well, maybe they're more like a regional government, a regional district government?
I don't know if either of those will be the model. And I know that is, what does it mean? But the bottom line is, it's why we signed this LOU with the Tsilhqot'in. We're going to try to work through this with them and figure out, how do we do this together? How do we do this that helps to create the ability for things to happen on the land base, to be able to work in partnership, to be able to make sure that all those issues of environment, culture, economic activity, all of those things can be balanced. And so we'll see what kind of a model comes from that. And then we'll also see whether or not that's what other nations are interested, or whether we'll be looking at something different. I don't know the answer to those questions. But that, I think, would be a mistake for the province if we came out and said, this is the path it will be. Because then that's not in partnership. The key with doing this is to be able to sit down with the nations and work in partnership to work through how this will look. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that in working with the Tsilhqot'in, we'll have a chance to be able to lay a template that other nations may be interested in being involved in.
Now, the Premier has met not only with Tsilhqot'in, but also all chiefs of from the Assembly of First Nations. And my sense is that they're looking at her saying, okay, that's a start, but we need to move way beyond this. Where are you going to go next? And there is a certain amount of trepidation on their behalf, because they're saying, we've been here before.
Yes.
Under Gordon Campbell's government, we were here, and then everybody pulled back. Can we move forward now?
So I think that's why, as I mentioned, there's a great deal of work that needs to be done with both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in the province of British Columbia. We need to talk about what this is, and we need to talk about how we can move and find that path forward. So I think if we miss this opportunity, if for some reason we decide to pull back, or if for some reason we decide to set expectations too high in terms of time, in terms of what's happening, then I think we will have missed a great chance here to bring a great deal of certainty and reconciliation between all peoples in the province. And so it's going to be important that we try to do this in a timely way, but it's also going to be important that we take the time and try to do it right, and not try to rush to conclusions.
Grand Chief Philip said that he met with the Premier and said, you have the opportunity to be the one. You can be the one who changes this. And where is she at? How important is this to her that this get done?
Well, I think, our response to the Tsilhqot'in, embracing that decision, going up onto their territory, first time ever that a premier has met with the Tsilhqot'in people, first time ever that a premier has been out to that area, and certainly, of course, because it's the first tidal area, that's another first. That's a pretty strong expression by the premier and the willingness to want to work with First Nations. The All Chiefs meeting was yet another, expression, and so I think there is an opportunity here for us to be able to work together on these things. Where it goes, it's hard to say at this point. Because it's like I say, this is new territory. We're at a fork in the road, and we're going to go off down a new path. In many ways, it's uncharted.
You will be on October 26th at the ceremony in the Tsilhqot'in with the Premier, will you? I would imagine.
I'm certainly hoping to be, and that will be a decision that our whip has to make because I suspect the legislature will be sitting, and so I will need leave to be away from the legislature. But if I don't need leave to be away from the legislature, I'll certainly be there, and certainly I'll be asking leave to go and attend those events.
So it's one thing for the Premier to be there. First Nations are saying, okay, we're seeing movement on behalf of the provincial government, but you're not alone in this. You also have a relationship with the federal government, which has a tremendous amount of responsibility in us being able to have true reconciliation. Chief Joe Alphonse says, okay, great, we've got the Premier coming to our territory. We want Stephen Harper. And are you in discussion with the federal government to see whether or not you can make that happen?
Well, those are obviously discussions going on between my office and the federal office, and I wouldn't want to comment at this stage about where that sort of component is. But one thing that's clear, and it's clear through the treaty process, and I think the federal government has taken some recent steps. We do need to have all three partners at the table and working through this, and that's what we are hoping to be able to achieve as we explore down this path and as we try to find our way forward for the future.
You'd like to see that happen?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, all three levels of government are critical in terms of being able to reach reconciliation. Treaty, of course, being one of the highest forms of reconciliation that we can have. And so I think it's important to be able to have those relationships.
Do you anticipate with the other outstanding land claims that we're going to wind up going the route of the courts, or will we actually be able to negotiate agreements? And I can't help but wonder, what works better for the province? Does it work better to have it run through the court system because of the amount of time that it takes, or are we better off negotiating agreements that work?
We believe strongly that the only path forward is negotiation. The litigation component could create a lost generation. It took 25 plus years for the Tsilhqot'in decision to wind its way through the courts. Mm-hmm. The relationship was stressed. It became difficult to be able to do things. That's not what we want to see happen. If we can at all, by all means, we would like to be in a situation where we are negotiating our path forward, how we develop the relationship, how we work through various issues. And I'll just give you one example of a difference and a different approach that we're trying to take. We announced not long ago what we called Liquefied Natural Gas Environmental Stewardship Initiative. Mm-hmm. And this is an initiative that we didn't come out and say, here's what we're going to do and we want you to be partners. We said, here's a concept, help work with us, shape this, and give it an ability to be able to make sure that it's actually going to achieve goals on both sides. And so that's what we want to try to do with First Nations on a broader scale. How do we sit down and work with nations to work through the complexities of these issues and to negotiate where we need to be and where we can be able to build, healthy and wealthy communities for Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal alike.
Are we going to be able to do that if First Nations industry and the provincial government say that's the direction we want to move in, but the feds aren't joining us? Are we able to move forward even if they're a reluctant participant?
Well, as I mentioned, over the last 9 years and all the agreements that we've had, virtually all those agreements were between the province and nations. Some were of a tripartite nature. And I think it's important that we move forward with the relations as quickly as we can. I would like the federal government to be able to be involved and partner on that, but at the same time, we don't want to see a lost generation. We need to be able to move these things through quickly. And so we're going to be engaging with the nations around this, and we're hopeful that the federal government will be part of it. They recently announced a number of steps that they're going to take, which I think were very positive and gives an opportunity for them to be able to get involved and engaged. So, I'm an optimist, I guess you can say, as to where we can be.
We need them, though, from a financial perspective. Like, they bring the money to the table.
Yes, we do. All the revenue sharing agreements and things to date are between the province and First Nations, not the federal government side. They're involved on the treaty side, and incremental treaty approaches is something that they've said they now want to be a part of. But it would be nice to be able to have them as full partners at the table.
Now, sorry to throw this at you kind of like completely out of the blue, but I interviewed former Attorney General Jeff Plant on this very topic, and he said, I wonder what would happen if we were to just settle all land claims now, because we bring the land as the province and the feds bring the money. It would be an enormous injection of money into the British Columbia economy. And any chance that might happen?
Well, we through treaty, the federal government has expressed some desire to be able to move forward on a number of files, which would be very, very helpful. The question in my mind is really, so treaty works for some nations, it doesn't for others. Some nations are quite advanced, other tables seem to have stalled. The question in my mind is, how do you ultimately reach reconciliation? How do you find those ways to be able to work together on even small things, all the way through to the great big things like treaty? And I think it's important to build all of those sort of steps one upon another. If we can get to a situation where we've got, tremendous amount of certainty on the land, I think that creates a huge opportunity, both economically and socially, for First Nations and non-First Nations alike. And of course, if we can get the federal government to be part of that, that's what we need to do. But ultimately, you need to build confidence. You need to build the relationship. You need to be able to build trust. And those are done one step at a time.
So we do all that. We create a model that shows industry that they can come in, they can work with First Nations, they can work with the provincial government, they can do their business. But now there's a reduced amount of money that goes to the provincial government because there is going to be revenue sharing that's going to go back to that First Nation. How does that affect the province's bottom line?
So we've been doing revenue sharing now for like I say, a long time in our relationships. There's been literally tens of millions of dollars. I can't remember the exact number around forestry agreement, where that was revenue that was coming into the province on a regular basis, and we have now said that we're sharing it and send that money out to nations. Similarly, on new and expanded mines, we've taken up to 37.5% of the royalty revenue and shared it back with First Nations. And what we found from that is actually that helps to create economic activity. It actually helps to build entrepreneurial potential, and that has benefits to both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal alike, really across the province.
But that's been happening on a sort of a region or case-by-case basis. What happens when it starts to happen, when it's province-wide?
Well, we've got the majority of our mines now have that kind of revenue sharing. We've got over 160 forestry revenue sharing agreements. So the majority of the nations now, vast majority of nations, are now involved on the forestry side. Where we have oil and gas, we've got economic benefit agreements. We're sharing on that side of things. And so I think the important thing to be looking at is why are we doing these agreements? And it's part of how a commitment we did to how to change the relationship and how to try to change the socioeconomic numbers. And so obviously, from a provincial perspective, from a bottom line perspective, we have made a commitment to balance the budget. We have a commitment to freeze income taxes. So those are things that we're going to carry on doing. But we are and need to work with nations around how you do the revenue sharing. And so there is a change, certainly a change and an impact on the revenue side. But I think it's an important step to do. And I think it actually will create more economic opportunity than not doing it.
But you have to be very careful in the way that you're sharing that revenue, that you're not imposing too heavy of a levy, I guess, against industry where they start to go, the cost is too high to do this. And so finding that pretty delicate balance is going to be an ever-changing challenge.
Well, of course, we encourage industry to enter into impact benefit agreements and to engage with First Nations. But on the revenue sharing side, we actually have not passed that on to industry. Mm-hmm. So those have been revenues that would have come to the government that we have shared through what we normally would have had. So we haven't said, okay, well, we're going to do 37.5% of the mineral tax on new and expanded mines. And by the way, we're increasing, but we haven't gone through that route. And that's certainly not our intention at this stage.
So is it important to you that industry understand that there isn't going to be an increase on
I can't say that there won't be an increase. But to date, in the work that we've done, we have not had any increases. And I think it's important, and I think industry does understand that in terms of how we've been trying to work together. Industry is I think that, they've understood what we've been trying to do, and I think have been generally supportive of what we've been trying to do. Ultimately, if you have those partnerships between the province and First Nations, and if you have those partnerships between First Nations and industry, and you're going to have a much better environment for activity to be able to happen. Investors are going to have more confidence to be able to want to put dollars in the ground because they can see how they can get a return. And you have that stability that I think all investors want to be able to see. And so that's part of why we're doing this. It's trying to deal with the social and economic side of First Nations, trying to create the wealthy and healthy communities, but at the same time making sure that investors can feel confident to be able to put what in the case of liquefied natural gas is literally tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars into the ground with expectations of being able to do business for long periods of time.
When we look at the New Prosperity Mine and their relationship with the Tsilhqot'in, where we're at right now, what's the lesson to be learned from that?
I actually look at it from a perspective of the relationship of a company like New Gold with the First Nations they're working at. And because New Gold has taken a little bit different approach, they've gone out early, they work with First Nations around the project that they're trying to do. They have engaged in impact benefit agreements. There is, I think it's close to 25% of their workforce is Aboriginal. And so there's a tremendous partnership that has been built. And they've been very, very successful in the projects that they've tried to do in the province. And First Nations have been very supportive in wanting to do those things. And so when we talk about examples of doing business, we often like to look at those examples to say, here's one case and one example of how you can be very successful in working with First Nations and look at it from a lessons learned from that side.
Well, Chief Alphonse also points out the relationship that they have with West Fraser. And those really are the models that are setting the course for the future.
The working in partnership and trying to, yes, I would agree. There's many examples like that around the province that have been very positive in terms of companies reaching out, working with nations, being respectful of the environment and of their culture and their heritage, and finding ways to be able to do business.
You're putting a good light on this decision, but there's no doubt that it's causing you and the entire ministry and the Premier's office to look at the world differently. What's the thing that unnerves you the most about this?
When I first saw the decision, I was very concerned because I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to create some instability. When I started to look at the decision and think about the decision and read through the details of the decision, I came to realize that, as with anything, where there is uncertainty, there's opportunity. And that, to me, is what immediately then came through. Now, the risk, from my perspective, is that we don't seize this opportunity. The risk is that expectations on either side become unaligned, and we are unable to seize the potential of what this is. The tidal land decision that is there ends the question in that area. It defines how you can do work with the Tsilhqot'in where that tidal area is. And so could you imagine that the potential of economic activity that could be unleashed if that question was answered in a holistic manner across the province? I mean, there was a report that was done a number of years ago that looked at treaty and talked about how the uncertainty on the land was costing our economy somewhere between $10 and $13 billion. And how that could be made up if you could bring certainty. And so when you look at what this could do, that is what I started to look at and start to think at and got actually excited about. But the risk is that we don't seize this opportunity, or that people don't understand it for what it is and what we could potentially do.
Are you hopeful also on the social side that this truly is a very important step towards reconciliation? That I think that most people who understand Aboriginal relationships with the country of Canada realize we have to heal.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with the with Earl and Countess of Wessex just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And one of the things we talked about was how do you reach reconciliation? And really, it has to actually start, as I mentioned earlier, straight with education, understanding where a relationship has come, so that you have a mutual point from which you can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that in part with the addressing title and addressing how ultimately that relationship will develop has the potential to be able to reach that reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that we need to embrace, and actually it's going to take some bold work, I think, on both sides to be able to do it.
On the non-Aboriginal side, there's so many people who don't understand the history, and they have a tendency to want to say, well, okay, that was then, this is now. But
yes.
There's a wonderful saying that comes out of the United States, and I had heard it quoted in regards to reconciliation here with First Nations is, you may think that you're done with the past, but the past is not done with you. And we are still in that process of moving our way through that.
There's no question. And I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission work that has done was a good step.
Yeah.
But it's only one step. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. And for myself, I mean, when I went through the education system, I did not learn about our history, our joint history. I learned about, the history of Europeans coming in and how Canada was settled and became a country and all those sort of things, but not to the kind of depth of what happened in the relationships and the challenges that went on through that. And it wasn't actually until I had the honor of serving in public office that I actually had a chance to learn some of that history. And I was shocked. I was quite surprised.
Me too. I wasn't even aware of the Tsilhqot'in War. It was Chief Joe Alphonse who brought me up to speed on that.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, I understand why there's a lack of trust.
One of the most powerful emotional things for me was when I visited with Stalo Nation not long ago. And I visited one of their office buildings, and they had a bunch of historical artifacts and things on display as part of the facility that they have. One of the pieces that they had was on residential schools.
Yeah.
And on display on there was a list of punishments that were received. And one of those punishments was, if they spoke their language, here was the punishment to try to prevent that. And it's just, when you think about how fundamental language can be to your culture, to your identity, and yet that was something that was, through the residential school, was you were punished if you tried to hold on and grasp that. That's just one example of a wide range of things that have happened over the years that are part of our shared history that you need to understand in terms of how we can move forward.
I was at an event last week in Tofino at a hotel, and one of the women that was there was from Nitnat Lake area, which is quite a distance from Tofino. And she said, that used to be my dorm room there. And I wasn't even aware that there was a residential school there. I grew up in this province, and I'm disconnected with that. And the more I learn about it, the more I realize we got a long way to go.
We do. But, the important part of learning the history as well is how you do get on to reconciliation, the acceptance and understanding, and then what that can create in terms of the certainty in the land base, the certainty for the environment, the certainty for both peoples to be able to find the future. And so I'm an optimist about where we're going. It will take time, as all things do. But certainly, I think nations are interested in engaging in the economy. They're interested in engaging in all these things. And where you've got willing partners, I think we've got opportunities to be able to do things.
Don't you find that a little bit surprising, considering the history? There's a part of me that goes, if I was on the receiving end of that history, I'd be saying, move along now. But there doesn't seem to be that. There seems to be a genuine interest in saying, okay, let's figure this out.
I would agree with you there. There is a genuine interest. And, I'm sure there are parties, perhaps even on both sides, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal alike, that, would like to talk about history or past grievances or other things. And those are important conversations to have. But I think, First Nation leadership in particular understands that is the past is not going to change. It is what it is. And by understanding that, it helps us to be able to move forward. And they would like to be able to move forward. They want to be able to see their children do well through school. They want to see them get educations. They want to see them be able to build a future and to be able to change. And so that's what's exciting, because that is things that we can work towards as part of the overall package of how we reach reconciliation.
Let's hope that we can figure it out. Thank
I
you
hope
very
so too.
much. Thank you for doing this.